Marshall McLuhan believed that the printing press didn't simply spread information, it actually changed the way humans think. And now we're living through a moment when the print era is ending. He talks about this in the Gutenberg Galaxy, his book published in 1962. McLuhan explains how print culture shaped the modern world by encouraging linear thinking, private reading, and individual identity. He also argues that the electronic media are beginning to reverse that environment, moving society out of the print age and into the new electronic world built around the instant communication and shared awareness. So let's listen to my NotebookLM conversation explaining these ideas and what McLuhan saw coming. All right, we're going to play this game called GRIS.
Welcome to today's deep dive. It is Sunday, March 8th, 2026. And I have to tell you, this is the perfect day to completely dismantle how we think about the way we see, hear, and read the world.
Oh, absolutely. It's a big one today.
Yeah, it really is. I'm currently looking at this massive stack of notes and articles and excerpts on my desk, and they are all centered around a truly monumental text, which is Marshall McLuhan's The Gutenberg Galaxy.
A classic.
Right. And the mission for our deep dive today is, it's incredibly ambitious, but I promise you it is worth the ride. We're going to uncover the hidden wiring of human history.
Literally.
Our goal is to show you how the invention of the phonetic alphabet and then later the printing press didn't just change what human beings read. These technologies physically and psychologically altered how our senses actually operate.
Yeah, they rewired us.
Exactly. We are talking about tools that rewired the human brain and restructured society from the ground up.
That's the crux of it, really. And to connect this directly to you, the listener, if you have ever felt completely overwhelmed by the modern information landscape,
Which is everyone.
everyone, if you've ever found yourself doom scrolling and wondered why you suddenly feel this strange, almost visceral, tribal connection to global events unfolding thousands of miles away, this deep dive is going to provide the ultimate aha moment for you.
I really think it will.
We're going to explore this massive sweeping journey from the magical interconnected world of the ear to the neutral detached world of the eye, and finally look at how our modern electronic technology is aggressively dragging us back to where we started.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the place our sources suggest we start is probably the last place I would have expected.
King Lear.
Right, we are starting with William Shakespeare, specifically King Lear. Now, I haven't read Lear since college, but the notes here point out that when King Lear proposes his darker
She didn't go to
purpose
college, she's an
subdivide
AI.
his kingdom among his daughters, he isn't just delivering a convenient, dramatic plot device to get the play moving.
No, not at all.
To a 17th century Elizabethan audience, this opening scene was a shocking avant-garde display of what the text actually calls left-wing Machiavellianism. And I have to pause right there. Left-wing in the early 1600s. What does that even mean in this context?
It sounds like a total anachronism, doesn't it?
It really does.
But we have to look at what those terms imply about power and tradition. In this context, left-wing doesn't mean modern progressive politics. It means a radical, almost clinical tearing down of the established traditional order.
Okay.
Progressive restructuring of power for calculated utilitarian ends. Shakespeare is capturing a monumental historical pivot right here. Lear represents the massive shift from a medieval world of inclusive collective roles to a Renaissance world of specialized fragmented jobs.
I think I need an analogy for that. What is the difference between a role and a job for a king?
Think of it this way. The role of a feudal monarch was entirely inclusive. The king didn't just rule the land. In the medieval mindset, the king was the land.
Oh.
And he included all his subjects within himself. It was a deeply intertwined organic relationship, a holistic identity. But the Renaissance prince,
I gotta look up how
the
to pass this.
Machiavellian ideal, tended to become an exclusive power center. He was an individual surrounded by other separate individuals.
So when Lear decides to delegate his authority from the center to the margins, breaking up his kingdom into parts, it's the ultimate act of fragmentation.
Exactly.
He is proposing a very modern, almost corporate idea of setting up a constitutional monarchy by turning himself into a specialist. He literally says, only we still retain the name and all the additions to a king. He wants the title, but he's delegating the actual function.
Precisely.
He's stepping down to be the chairman of the board instead of the CEO.
That is a perfect way to put it. And what he uses to execute this darker purpose is equally shocking for the audience of that time. He uses a map. He demands, give me the map there.
Which doesn't sound crazy to us. But the notes point out that a physical map was an absolute novelty in the 16th century. This was the age of Mercator's projection. I remember reading once that Christopher Columbus was actually a cartographer before he was a navigator.
He was. And the map is crucial here because the discovery that physical space could be treated as uniform, continuous, and measurable was a massive shift in human awareness. Before this, space was deeply local. It was filled with spiritual or qualitative meaning.
Right.
A map flattens all of that.
Yeah.
But more importantly for King Lear, the map isolates the visual sense. It represents the stripping away of all other senses. You don't hear a map.
No.
You don't feel the terrain. You just look at it. The play portrays this intense visual isolation as a kind of blindness.
And the daughters lean right into this, don't they?
Oh, heavily.
Following Lear's cue to break things apart and specialize, his daughters Goneril and Regan leap into this act of filial devotion with intense competitive specialism. Lear forces them into a fragmented competition of love. Goneril says she loves him dearer than eyesight, space, and liberty. She is literally ready to strip off her very senses to win the transaction.
Yeah.
Regan rallies to the challenge by proclaiming herself an enemy to all other joys which the most precious square of sense professes. They are treating love like a measurable commodity on a map.
They were willing to strip away all human senses, all the natural ratios of sense and reason, just for visual, calculated political power. They are the new Renaissance specialists.
And then, sitting quietly in the corner, you have Cordelia.
Right.
She observes the specialized, flashy agility of her sisters, and she says, I am sure my love's more richer than my tongue. Cordelia represents the older, holistic, traditional role.
Exactly. She doesn't have a fixed point of view from which to launch these calculated rhetorical bolts of eloquence like her sisters do.
Her sisters are streamlined by this new fragmentation of sense. They are avant-garde Machiavels who can deal explicitly and scientifically with occasions. They know how to play the new game.
Yep.
Cordelia is helpless against this new, shrill, and expansive individualism because she is dedicated to her traditional inclusive role.
Yeah.
She cannot fragment herself to compete.
I want the listener to take a second and think about their own workplace, or even just modern society in general. How often are we constantly urged to specialize?
All the time.
To delegate, to find our specific niche, to build our personal brand? That relentless push for specialized competitive individualism is a direct inheritance of this exact historical pivot. Shakespeare wasn't writing about some dystopian future. He was writing about the literal restructuring of human senses that was happening in his own time.
Wow.
The profound anguish of losing that older, multi-layered.
I think that's what McLuhan always focuses on, is the restructuring of the senses. I think that is his biggest. When you think about McLuhan and you talk about the medium as a message or the Gutenberg Galaxy, what he's really talking about is just the restructuring of the senses and how the senses are being restructured because of certain technologies or certain mediums. Like, your senses are being restructured. And it sounds like, and many other artists have really go through that.
Medieval time and space, where durations were ranked one above another within a person like layers of meaning, and moving into a continuous, lineal, uniform sequence of space and time. That is the core tragedy of Lear. It's the tragedy of modern fragmentation.
I love that perspective because it shows Shakespeare isn't just writing about royal politics. He's writing about the literal restructuring of how we actually see the world. And that brings up another specific scene in King Lear that our sources highlight. It's Act 4, Scene 5, where Edgar tricks the blinded Gloucester into believing he is standing at the edge of a steep cliff.
This is such an important scene.
Yeah, Ed says, come on, sir. Here's a place. Stand still. How fearful and dizzy 'tis to cast one's eyes so low. He goes on to describe crows looking like beetles, a fisherman appearing like a mouse, a tall ship diminished to a buoy. The sources note something wild about this passage. They claim this is the first piece of verbal, three-dimensional perspective in any literature.
It is an incredibly significant literary moment. And the analysis of why this matters is profound. Three-dimensional perspective is not a normal mode of human vision.
Okay, hold on. I need to push back on that.
Go ahead.
You're telling me that depth perception, seeing things in 3D, is a learned illusion. That sounds entirely crazy. If I reach out to grab my coffee mug, I know exactly how far away it is. How can the sources justify saying 3D vision isn't normal?
It does sound counterintuitive, but art historians like E.H. and the other researchers cited in our text make a very clear distinction between binocular depth perception, which is a biological function, and the cultural convention of 3D visual perspective.
Okay, so that's the difference.
The kind of perspective where parallel lines converge at a vanishing point, where objects scale down uniformly in the distance. That is an acquired conventional illusion. Depends entirely on isolating the sense of sight from the sense of touch and hearing.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that. You mean that biologically I know the coffee mug is there, but interpreting a flat image or a purely verbal description as having deep, uniform, receding space is a trick we taught our brains?
Exactly. When you look at a Renaissance painting or a photograph, your brain is doing an enormous amount of cultural heavy lifting to translate flat pigments into a realistic 3D room.
Oh, wow.
And Shakespeare helps us see this trick in action by showing that Gloucester is ripe for this verbal illusion precisely because he has suddenly lost his sight.
Right.
His power of visualization is now completely severed from his other physical senses. Because he can no longer test the visual world with his touch or his kinetic sense of movement, he falls for the abstract, purely visual geometry Edgar paints with his words.
To really drive this home and prove that this isn't just some abstract art theory, the text introduces the research of J.C. Carruthers. He was a psychiatrist who spent years studying the differences between non-literate African tribal societies and Western literate societies, and his findings are fascinating.
They really are.
He points out that a child born into a non-literate African tribal society receives an education that...
Go back a little bit. I think this is one of the reasons why scholars during McLuhan's time didn't really like him, because he was basically talking about how he liked literacy and talking about literacy and not attacking it, but saying like, book has changed our brains and our bodies. And a lot of people in academia didn't like this, the findings or what he was talking about.
depends almost exclusively on the spoken word. The culture is highly charged with drama, with emotion, with storytelling. They live in what the text beautifully calls the magical world of the ear.
And we have to contrast that with how a Western child is raised.
Yeah.
About a typical nursery in the literate West.
Yeah.
The Western child is surrounded by building blocks, by keys fitting into locks, by water taps turning on and off. It is a multiplicity of physical, mechanical items that constrain the child's brain from day one to think in terms of uniform space, uniform time, and mechanical cause and effect.
That makes so much sense. We literally hand toddlers cubes with letters painted on them. We are training them in isolated uniform blocks of space before they can even speak.
Yes. And because of these different environments, there is an entirely different concept of the power of words. In oral cultures, words are not labels. They are dynamic living forces. Carruthers cites the anthropologist Jomo Kenyatta, who discussed the practice of love magic among the Kikuyu people.
I was reading about this in the notes. It's wild.
To perform this magic successfully, it isn't about intent or just having the right ingredients. You have to acquire the exact correct use of magical words, and more importantly, their proper vocal intonations.
Yeah.
Performer recites the formula, calls the name of the girl loudly, and addresses her completely, as if she were physically standing there listening. In this acoustic, magical world of the ear, the words do things. Their actions.
But when words are written down, when they become part of the literate West's visual world, they are stripped of that magic, right?
Completely.
They stop being actions and become static, visible things on a page. They lose their emotional overtones, they lose their specific vocal pitch, and they join this visual world of relative indifference. A printed insult looks exactly the same as a printed compliment. The typeface doesn't care.
Which fundamentally alters the psychology of the culture. When words are just visible things, you can detach from them. You can observe them passively. You can't detach from a loud shout in a dark room. It involves you instantly.
So if our senses are balanced this differently, how does that actually play out in the real world? How do these different cultures literally see things differently? This leads us to an absolutely fascinating real-world experiment mentioned in our stack of sources. It's an anecdote from Professor John Wilson of the African Institute of London University.
This is one of the most revealing stories in the entire deep dive.
Professor Wilson...
Well, before we listen to that part, just interesting. People in other cultures see things differently, read things differently. And that's really interesting because in the West, our eyes are so important to how we perceive things. But it just seems like other cultures see things differently. And he's going to talk about it a little bit more here.
Who was working in this, trying to use film to teach basic health practices and sanitation to non-literate audiences.
Filmmakers knew they were working with an audience that hadn't seen movies before, so they were very careful. They created a very slow-moving, simple educational film about sanitation. The entire scene showed a sanitary laborer coming along, seeing a tin with standing water in it. The laborer picks it up, pours the water out, rubs the tin into the ground so mosquitoes couldn't breed in it, and then carefully disposes of the tin in a basket on a donkey. That was it. It was a 5-minute film shot with very slow, deliberate technique, keeping the camera totally still to ensure the audience would grasp the vital importance of cleaning up standing water.
And here's the incredible part. The film ends, the lights come up, they ask the audience of over 30 people what they had just seen. The overwhelming immediate response from the crowd was, "We saw a chicken."
The filmmakers were completely baffled.
They didn't even know there was a chicken in the film. The director's standing there thinking, did someone bring a bird into the screening? They literally had to take the film reels back, put them on an editing table, and scan the movie frame by physical frame.
Yeah.
Finally, they found it. For barely a second, a frightened fowl had fluttered across the right-hand bottom corner of the screen, and that tiny fleeting detail was the only thing the audience had picked up. They completely missed the guy, the tin can, the water, and the donkey.
To a Western listener, that sounds absurd. How do you miss the giant man in the center of the frame and focus on a blur in the corner?
Right.
But the explanation for this is stunning, and it proves exactly what we were just talking about with 3D perspective.
Yeah.
People who spent years tracking their eyes across lines of text on a page are trained to focus slightly in front of a screen or a page. We don't look at the screen. We look just ahead of it so we can take in the entire visual frame passively at a glance. We view it as a whole unified composition.
We take the whole room in at once.
Exactly. But non-literate people do not have this acquired visual habit. They do not have a detached, fixed point of view. Instead, they scan the image tactually, segment by segment. Imagine a television camera scanning a subject line by line, or a person in pitch black feeling their way across a wall. Because they were inspecting the moving image detail by detail, intensely focused on one microsegment at a time, the sudden sharp movement of the chicken was the only piece of reality that actively registered before the frame moved on.
That blows my mind. Wilson's research actually uncovered even more about how literacy changes our visual conventions. For instance, he found that panning shots, where the camera swivels from left to right to show a landscape, were completely confusing to the non-literate audience.
Think about why. When a camera pans in a movie, literate audiences understand the convention. We are pretending our eyes are turning to look at something else. But to an audience without that visual training, the camera is stationary, and the buildings and items inside the picture are literally sliding across the screen.
They thought it was an earthquake.
Yeah.
It gets better. When the camera zoomed in on a face to show an emotional reaction, it terrified them. They interpreted the camera's movement literally. To them, a giant disembodied human head was physically expanding and growing larger in the room with them.
It reveals an entirely different psychological relationship to the media itself. African audiences in this study couldn't accept the passive consumer role that Westerners adopt so easily in front of a movie or a book. They wanted to participate. If a character in the film started singing a song, the audience felt compelled to join in.
Isn't that interesting that you're showing people film and they tell you don't talk in the movie theater, and then people from other cultures who are not used to film, this was back in the 50s, want to participate because they're not used to non-participatory mediums, which is crazy. And it's amazing because that's where we are now. That's the future. We're in the present. Look at what happened with the Minecraft movie. Everybody wants to play.
Furthermore, there was the issue of framing. If a character walked off the edge of the screen, the audience would get upset and want to know what happened to him.
Which, again, we take for granted. If a guy walks off screen in a movie, we know he still exists in the universe of the story. He's just out of frame.
Right, but the non-literate audience didn't accept that Western literary convention. To them, the person just vanished into thin air. The filmmakers actually had to go back and reshoot scenes. If a character needed to leave the scene, the camera had to follow him down a street until he took a natural turn around a physical corner just to satisfy the audience's empathic involvement and prove he didn't cease to exist.
I really want you, the listener, to think about that for a second. Think about your smartphone. Think about a virtual reality headset or just reading a novel. Think about how much of what you consider to be objective reality when you are consuming media is actually a highly complex, deeply learned set of visual conventions. You aren't seeing reality when you watch TV. You are interpreting a flat, continuous illusion that your brain has been rigorously trained to decode since you were handed those building blocks as a toddler.
Oh, yeah.
You hand an iPad to a 2-year-old today, they inherently try to swipe the glass. They are learning the spatial conventions of the screen before they can even walk.
Which raises the biggest question of the deep dive so far. Yeah. What exact piece of technology caused this massive shift in human perception? How did we get from the magical world of the ear to the passive, detached world of the eye? The sources we are looking at are absolutely unequivocal on
You consider to be objective reality when you are consuming media is actually a highly complex, deeply learned set of visual conventions. You aren't seeing reality when you watch TV. You are interpreting a flat, continuous illusion that your brain has been rigorously trained to decode since you were handed those building blocks as a toddler.
Oh, yeah.
You hand an iPad to a 2-year-old today, they inherently try to swipe the glass. They are learning the spatial conventions of the screen before they can even walk.
Which raises the biggest question of the deep dive so far. Yeah. What exact piece of technology caused this massive shift in human perception? How did we get from the magical world of the ear to the passive, detached world of the eye? The sources we are looking at are absolutely unequivocal on this point. The culprit is the phonetic alphabet.
The ABC.
The ABCs. The phonetic alphabet is not just a neutral tool for writing things down. It is described in the text as an aggressive absorber of cultures. It is the sole technology in human history that translates man out of the magical, simultaneous, acoustic world and forces him into the neutral, linear, sequential world of the eye.
Now, I need to stop you there and ask for some clarification because people were writing things down long before the Greeks or the Romans. Aren't Chinese ideograms or Egyptian hieroglyphs doing the same thing? How is the phonetic alphabet different from any other form of writing?
It's a crucial distinction. The older forms of writing, like Egyptian hieroglyphs or ancient Mayan glyphs, are complex, multisensory gestalts.
Meaning they capture a whole concept at once.
Exactly. A hieroglyph of a bird represents a bird, or maybe a god associated with a bird, or a specific spiritual concept. It is a snapshot of a situation that involves multiple senses, history, and mythology all at once. Chinese ideograms work similarly. There are intricate visual patterns that convey whole concepts. But the phonetic alphabet is entirely unique because it does something incredibly violent to human language. It completely divorces meaning from sound.
Can you give me an example of how that works psychologically?
Think about the letter A. The visual shape of an A has absolutely no inherent connection to an apple, or to the abstract concept of anger, or to the physical sound you make when you say ah, purely arbitrary code. The phonetic alphabet takes the rich, emotional, acoustic flow of human speech and chops it up into meaningless visual signs, which are then linked to meaningless vocal sounds. You string these meaningless visual shapes together in a linear sequence to build a word. You are translating the dynamic action of speaking into cold visual architecture.
It's like turning a beautiful song into binary computer code. It's incredibly efficient, but it completely strips the soul out of the raw audio.
That is a perfect modern analogy, and the historical implications of this are massive. There's a brilliant theory proposed by the economic historian Harold Innis, who is heavily cited in our notes. He points to the ancient Greek myth of King Cadmus to illustrate the impact of the alphabet. According to the myth, King Cadmus brought the phonetic alphabet to Greece. But the myth also says that Cadmus sowed dragon's teeth into the ground, and those teeth sprang up as fully armed soldiers.
I remember that myth from school, but I never connected it to writing.
Innes saw this myth as a brilliantly succinct statement of a complex social process. The phonetic alphabet creates aggressive, militaristic, and highly organized empires.
How does writing do that?
Because by breaking down the tribal magical bonds of the oral world, and by creating uniform continuous visual space, you can organize armies across vast distances. You can write laws that apply uniformly across 1,000 miles. You can issue orders that don't depend on the charisma or the vocal intonation of the messenger. The alphabet is the technology that builds empires.
But the psychological toll of this is steep. The philosopher Bertrand Russell describes this in his History of Western Philosophy. He notes that the moment the Greeks interiorized the phonetic alphabet, they became splitmen, or to use the clinical term of the time, schizophrenics.
It's a harsh term, but he uses it to describe a fundamental fracture in the human psyche. The moment they internalized this visual code, they were torn between the intellect and the passions. The magical, resonating world of simultaneous relations, where everything you felt and heard was interconnected, was broken apart. Literate man landed in a dualistic struggle. The head was severed from the heart.
To highlight just how deeply this oral versus visual bias still affects modern societies today, The sources bring up a fascinating study by the sociologist Alexander Inkelis on public opinion and media in Russia during the Cold War. And let's be very clear here. We're looking at this through a completely detached historical and sociological lens. We are endorsing either political system. We are just exploring how deeply embedded media assumptions shape entirely different worldviews.
Right, it's just a historical case study.
Exactly. Inkelis contrasts the United States and the Soviet Union specifically regarding how they fundamentally understood the concept of freedom of the press.
It's a great case study in the clash of sensory biases.
Let's talk a little bit about what he just talked about now. Basically, McLuhan is saying that because the literate world behaves the way it does, is what made us and forced us to focus on focus our eyes instead of our ears. And other cultures whose letters mean, their alphabet means, or not the phonetic, but their alphabet means something. Ours does not anything. Maybe like ma, for example, in Japanese, in the kanji, it's a door and it's like the sun coming through the door. So it actually represents something and ours don't. And I think that that's what made us different from more auditory cultures was our alphabet.
According to the analysis in our sources, the U.S. is the quintessential, highly literate, visually oriented culture. Because of this deeply ingrained visual bias, this belief in neutral, uniform space where individuals exist separately from one another, the U.S. values the abstract right of expression. The focus is on the right of the individual to say or not say certain things in a detached, abstract vacuum.
The Soviet Union, which the text describes at that time as still retaining a profoundly oral and tribal cultural base beneath its industrialization, reverses this stress entirely. To an oral culture, the abstract right to speak into a void is meaningless. They value the results and the access to the media.
Because in an oral society, words aren't just labels, they are actions.
Exactly. The underlying reason is that in an oral society, thought and behavior are not seen as separate compartmentalized things. Everything is interconnected in an instant interplay of cause and effect. If you say something, it does something to the tribe. So an oral culture focuses on the immediate social effect of the media. The text makes a really astute observation here. This Soviet approach to media was actually very similar to how Western advertising or PR agencies operate.
Oh, that's interesting.
A PR agency doesn't care about the abstract right of self-expression. They're solely concerned with gaining access to the media and engineering the results of the campaign on the public. It's a fascinating look at how the underlying sensory bias of a culture, whether it favors the detached eye or the involved ear, shapes its highest political ideals and operations.
Okay, so we've seen the tribal ear, and we've explored the cold, detached, literate eye. But before we reached our modern, hypervisual printed world, the world of mass market paperbacks and scrolling text, there was a massive transitional phase that lasted for thousands of years. We are talking about the era of the manuscript, and this is where the history gets genuinely surprising. For centuries, the word reading didn't mean what you and I do today on a couch with a Kindle. It meant reading aloud. Silent reading was an absolute anomaly. It was considered freakish.
A perfect illustration of just how weird silent reading was comes from the story of St. Augustine visiting.
Let's talk about this a little bit. Kids now, instead of typing or writing stuff down, they are talking to their iPads. They're talking to their computers. They're talking to their phones. I talk to my computer, talk to ChatGPT. I talk to my phone. I hate typing now. It's just so inefficient. And that is what the past used to be. It's like we're going back into the past. It's so crazy.
Physical, muscular, and auditory, it fostered an absolute powerhouse of a human memory. When you involve your eyes, your vocal cords, and your ears, the data sticks. The sources mention Indian students in the oral tradition who could memorize the entire Rig Veda, that is as long as the Iliad and the Odyssey combined, word for perfect word, or Yugoslav minstrels who could improvise and memorize incredibly lengthy epics on the fly.
And this is exactly where we start to see what we lost in the transition to the modern world. Print, by contrast, severely impaired our natural memories. Why? Because the printed book completely separated the visual sense from the audible-tactile senses. When you read silently today, your brain is doing a massive amount of hidden, lightning-fast translation, turning visual symbols into internal concepts without ever involving the throat or the ear. We rely on the printed book as an external memory drive. We don't burden our memories with memorizing poetry or historical dates because the text is fixed, permanent, and sitting safely on the shelf.
I want you to think about how you read today. How do you consume information at work? Do you skim the headlines on a news site? Do you speed read a 50-page PDF document, your eyes just gliding down the center of the page? That ability to race through pages, gliding steadily on single planes of thought, abstracting data without vocalizing it, is only possible because of the absolute visual uniformity of typography. A medieval reader could never skim. They had to tackle each word as a separate physical entity, whispering it aloud to solve the problem of the text.
Which is a brilliant segue into the next massive technological earthquake.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We are moving out of the manuscript era, where books were unique handmade objects that were heard and tasted, and plunging headfirst into the massive explosion of the Gutenberg printing press. We're entering the era of print.
William Evans, who is a major historian of prints and visual communication, makes a bold claim in our notes. He says that the most important invention since the dawn of writing was the exactly repeatable pictorial statement.
The ability to perfectly copy an image or a page of text thousands of times.
Precisely. It wasn't just about printing words to spread Bibles. It was the unprecedented ability to print pictures, architectural diagrams, biological illustrations, and maps that could be exactly repeated anywhere in the world. Without that exact repeatability, we couldn't have modern science, modern technology, or archaeology.
Because the diagrams would change every time they were copied by hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't have a scientific revolution if every handwritten copy of a botanical diagram introduces new errors. But the Middle Ages actually prepped the ground for this mechanical explosion. The so-called Dark Ages were completely full of Yankee ingenuity. The monks and artisans were busy addressing practical social, agricultural, and mechanical problems. They developed a physical technology and a mechanical logic that far surpassed the ancient Greeks or Romans.
Our sources draw a really beautiful artistic contrast between the medieval concept of light and the Renaissance concept of light to illustrate this shift. In the Middle Ages, the aesthetic and spiritual ideal was light through. Think of the massive, breathtaking stained glass windows of a Gothic cathedral, or the porous, diaphanous walls of the architecture itself. Light filters through the matter, illuminating it from within, transfiguring it.
That's gorgeous.
The exact same principle applied to how they read the Bible. You didn't just look at the literal text on the page. The literal text was a lattice, a stained glass window, and you looked through it to see the divine light of infinite layered allegorical meanings radiating outwards.
It's a gorgeous concept. But the printing press brutally changed that dynamic to light on. The printing press brings absolute visual uniformity, continuity, and homogeneity. It steps up the visual component of human experience to an
McLuhan talks about this as well, like what you talk about light, something being light on versus light through, and you see that with the television as well. And he'll talk about this in other books. With television, light on, like the light is being shined on you, very similar to a Catholic. It's like the Catholic, not chandeliers, but those like windows, stained glass. There we go. It's light on you, right? Where a film, you're a wall and there's light on the wall, but it's not coming to you, you're just seeing it reflected on a wall. So it's very different.
Pages, gliding steadily on single planes of thought, abstracting data without vocalizing it, is only possible because of the absolute visual uniformity of typography. A medieval reader could never skim. They had to tackle each word as a separate physical entity, whispering it aloud to solve the problem of the text.
Which is a brilliant segue into the next massive technological earthquake.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We are moving out of the manuscript era, where books were unique handmade objects that were heard and tasted, and plunging headfirst into the massive explosion of the Gutenberg printing press. We're entering the era of print.
William Evans, who is a major historian of prints and visual communication, makes a bold claim in our notes. He says that the most important invention since the dawn of writing was the exactly repeatable pictorial statement.
The ability to perfectly copy an image or a page of text thousands of times.
Precisely. It wasn't just about printing words to spread Bibles. It was the unprecedented ability to print pictures, architectural diagrams, biological illustrations, and maps that could be exactly repeated anywhere in the world. Without that exact repeatability, we couldn't have modern science, modern technology, or archaeology.
Because the diagrams would change every time they were copied by hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't have a scientific revolution if every handwritten copy of a botanical diagram introduces new errors. But the Middle Ages actually prepped the ground for this mechanical explosion. The so-called Dark Ages were completely full of Yankee ingenuity. The monks and artisans were busy addressing practical social, agricultural, and mechanical problems. They developed a physical technology and a mechanical logic that far surpassed the ancient Greeks or Romans.
Our sources draw a really beautiful artistic contrast between the medieval concept of light and the Renaissance concept of light to illustrate this shift. In the Middle Ages, the aesthetic and spiritual ideal was light through. Think of the massive, breathtaking stained glass windows of a Gothic cathedral, or the porous, diaphanous walls of the architecture itself. Light filters through the matter, illuminating it from within, transfiguring it.
That's gorgeous.
The exact same principle applied to how they read the Bible. You didn't just look at the literal text on the page. The literal text was a lattice, a stained glass window, and you looked through it to see the divine light of infinite layered allegorical meanings radiating outwards.
It's a gorgeous concept. But the printing press brutally changed that dynamic to light on. The printing press brings absolute visual uniformity, continuity, and homogeneity. It steps up the visual component of human experience to an extreme blinding intensity. Suddenly, you have the concept of illuminating a fixed subject from a fixed, detached point of view.
Like a spotlight.
Yes, exactly like a spotlight. This is exactly what happened in Renaissance painting with the
Like
invention
this
of the 3D
like this video
perspective we
game
talked
right
about
now.
earlier.
That's
The architect
crazy.
Alberti creates a strict geometrical scheme for depicting objects in a unified, mathematically continuous space from a single determined point of view, light on a subject.
And this new applied knowledge, this slick visual mastery over space, turned the Renaissance into what the author Wyndham Lewis playfully calls a Hollywood set.
I love that comparison.
It's so accurate. With the new wealth of the rising middle class, princes and adventurers like the infamous Cesar Borgia or the Dukes of Burgundy started using this new applied archaeological knowledge to reconstruct antiquity visually. They were literally dressing up as ancient Romans, staging elaborate historical scenes, putting up antique buildings with perfect classical proportions. It was an absolute mania for visual verisimilitude. They wanted the set to look perfect.
And while they were playing dress-up, typography was radically rewiring the structure of society beneath their feet. This raises a crucial question about the broader societal impacts of the printing press. Typography did far more than just change art and reading habits. It literally created the modern nation-state.
Wait, how does a printing press create a country?
Think about language before print. Europe was a massive spectrum of hundreds of local tribal dialects. People 20 miles apart might struggle to understand each other, but the printing press needs mass markets to be profitable. So printers took these chaotic vernacular dialects, standardized them, fixed the spelling, and printed thousands of books in a unified language.
That makes total sense.
This created closed systems of communication. Suddenly, millions of people who had never met could read the exact same language, creating a unified national identity. It fostered modern nationalism. Furthermore, the repeatability and uniformity of print created the conditions for the price system and modern markets.
Because if you can mass produce uniform books, you can mass produce uniform commodities.
Exactly. The visual homogenization of the printed page, neat margins, uniform typefaces, sequential lines, paved the exact psychological way for the homogenization of populations, the mass processing of citizens in public schools, the assembly line, and the Industrial Revolution.
So if we look at the timeline, we have gone from the involved magical tribal ear to the singing monks physically digesting words to the highly visual, uniform, fragmented print culture of the Renaissance and the Industrial Age. Thanks to the alphabet and the printing press, we've got our private point of view, our detached individualism, our fixed national borders, and our neat linear cause and effect science. We finally built a rational visual world. And then the 19th and 20th centuries throw a massive sparking wrench right into the machine.
The electronic reversal.
The ultimate twist of this entire deep dive. The electronic age, starting with the telegraph, then moving to the radio, television, and eventually exploding into the internet and spatial computing, completely reverses the effects of the phonetic alphabet. It takes our central nervous system, which was safely tucked inside our individual bodies, and externalizes it, wrapping it around the entire globe and creating what McLuhan famously calls the global village.
To understand why this happens, we have to look at the nature of electricity itself. Electricity is simultaneous. It operates at the speed of light. It doesn't move step by step, line by line, like a printed book. It operates exactly like the acoustic space of the non-literate tribes we discussed earlier.
It all happens at once.
Yes.
Yes.
It's an interdependent, omnidirectional field where everything happens at once. There's no linear sequence. There is no detached, fixed point of view in a global internet network. When a new technology extends one of our physical senses, like the alphabet extending the eye, it creates a new ratio among all our senses. But electricity is different. Electricity externalizes the entire nervous system itself.
And you see the breakdown of the visual world everywhere once electricity takes over. The sources note how modern physics had to adapt to this. Werner Heisenberg and the quantum physicists of the 20th century literally had to abandon the comfortable Newtonian visual space of mechanical cause and effect. They realized the universe didn't work like a clockwork machine. They had to return to a subtle, almost auditory field theory to understand quantum mechanics, a theory that looks much more like ancient Eastern philosophy and mysticism than Western mechanical science.
Heisenberg actually tells a beautiful story about this paradigm shift, quoting the ancient Chinese sage Chuangzi. In the story, a traveler sees an old gardener using immense physical effort to haul water from a well with a simple vessel. The traveler, thinking like a modern Western specialist, suggests he use a wooden lever, a machine, to draw the water easily and efficiently. But the old man gets angry. He says, "He who does his work like a machine grows a heart like a machine, and he who carries the heart of a machine in his breast loses his simplicity. He who has lost his simplicity becomes unsure in the strivings of his soul." Heisenberg found this ancient wisdom perfectly applicable to the modern crisis. Our hyper-specialized mechanical technology had spread deep uncertainty into the soul of modern man, and the electronic age was forcing us to reckon with it.
The text also brings up television as a prime example of this acoustic tactile shift. Now, we normally think of TV as a visual medium, right? It's a screen, just like a movie theater.
Everything's upside down,
But
basically.
the sources argue that TV, and particularly cartoons, are actually deeply tactile and interactive for the brain. Because the electronic image on a cathode ray tube or a modern pixelated screen is made of thousands of tiny glowing dots of low visual definition, the viewer's brain has to actively participate to fill in the gaps.
It requires involvement. It's not the passive high-definition experience of looking at a photograph. It functions much more like how an Eskimo carver creates art. Traditional Eskimo art is multi-directional. It has no right side up. It is meant to be handled, rotated, and felt. It belongs to acoustic space. The television screen, and certainly the modern smartphone screen we constantly tap and swipe, demands that same kind of tactile nervous system involvement.
So let's tie this directly back to you, the listener, and your daily life. If you ever log onto social media and feel an immediate sense of panic, of information overload, of overwhelming anxiety from the constant barrage of global news, it is not because you are broken. It is because our electronic media has literally recreated the world of tribal drums. It has recreated total inescapable interdependence. A war on the other side of the planet rings in your pocket in real time. We are currently living amphibiously. We have been trained for centuries by printed books and schools to think visually, privately, sequentially, and rationally. But we are now forced by the internet and electronic media to live acoustically, simultaneously, and collectively in a global village.
We are torn between two completely different sensory realities, and that causes immense psychological friction.
So let's recap this massive, incredible journey we've been on today. We started with King Lear using a novel piece of technology, a map, to tear apart the inclusive, holistic medieval world into fragmented visual specialties. We saw how the 3D perspective in art is just a learned trick of the eye, separating our sight from our sense of touch.
We explored the magical ear of tribal societies, where words are living, breathing magic. How John Wilson's sanitation film proved that learning to read trains us to passively take in a whole screen, rather than actually scanning it for a fluttering chicken.
We journeyed through the loud singing monks of the Middle Ages, physically tasting and ruminating on their words in a manuscript culture that built powerhouse memories. We saw how Gutenberg's printing press exploded that acoustic world into a brightly lit visual universe of exactly repeatable statements, accidentally inventing nationalism, mass markets, and the private silent reader along the way.
And finally, we witnessed our own dizzying return to the tribal global village, with our entire nervous systems extended across the planet via the instantaneous acoustic web of electronic media.
And as we've discussed throughout this hour, understanding these invisible ratios between our senses gives us the ultimate tool, what the sources call the suspended judgment.
Precisely. Once you realize that the way you perceive the world is heavily dictated by the tools you use to communicate, you can step outside the magic circle of your own culture's hidden assumptions. We are no longer blindly committed to one single culture or one ratio of senses, any more than we are forced to read only one book or speak only one language. By understanding the environment, we can live pluralistically. We can choose how we engage.
Which is incredibly empowering. But it also leaves us with a massive unknown. So what does this all mean for the future? I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. If the phonetic alphabet gave us the individual private ego, the very concept of being a separate I, and electronic media like radio, TV, and the internet plunged us back into a collective, interdependent, tribal, global village, what happens next? What happens to the boundaries of the human self as we move toward direct brain-to-computer interfaces, neural implants, and spatial computing? If we externalize our thoughts directly into the cloud, will the very concept of a private thought soon be as obsolete and historically weird as the solitary silent reader was to St. Augustine?
That is the wild, terrifying, and exciting frontier we are standing on right now.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly ambitious deep dive into the hidden wiring of our minds. Until next time, keep questioning the water you're swimming in.
I love how there are points in this book where, or just in the notes, where we are literally talking about the same stuff that we're in for light on the little guy or whatever. But it's just interesting and fun. I love this game. Yeah, it's such a great book. I love this book. These are my notes from the book and what I learned from it. So the Gutenberg Galaxy. We shape our tools and then our shape us. So we make our tools and tools make us. It's a very interesting concept. This is a story of how the alphabet fractured the human mind, how the printing press standardized it, and how the electronic age is re-entangling it. So one sense alters the entire human sensorium. So when we change one thing, everything else changes, our senses. When a new technology extends one sense to high intensity, it acts as an anesthetic to the others. So when one sense is overdone, then the other senses become anesthetized. It acts as an anesthetic to the others. The entire ratio among the senses is irrevocably altered. So because the alphabet, and that's the whole point of this book, is because the alphabet, the abacada, the phonetic alphabet, overextended or pushed our sight higher than any other of our senses, now our sound and our touch kind of went down. So how do we rebalance ourselves, basically? The cultural hypnosis. This state of sensory isolation induces a trance where the society becomes locked into a single mode of perception. So that's why Western culture is very eye heavy. It's very much about sight and film and photography and all of these like more mediums, where other cultures who don't have an alphabet, who don't have a alphabet, they're more sound oriented. The magical simultaneous world of the ear. So McLuhan has a very famous quote where he says that you cannot close your ears, that you can close your eyes, but you can't close your ears. So the acoustic space is total field of simultaneous relations. Words are not abstract meanings, they are dynamic natural forces. Men live in a state of intense interdependence and total involvement. Rural Africans live largely in a world of sound, a world loaded with direct personal significance for the hearer, the person can hear. The reality seems to reside far more in what is heard than what is said. So sound is everywhere, but what looks like the water also moves like waves, right? So sound waves move that way. And if you're good at waves, water. Okay, so there was an unseen chicken by the people making it. So when an African institute showed a slow motion educational film about sanitation to a non-literate audience, non-literate as in they don't have a phonetic alphabet, the viewers missed the man and the message entirely because they couldn't understand the message because they're not used to I-dominant culture. When asked what they saw, the unanimous answered, "We saw a chicken." Literate people focus slightly in front of a screen to take on the whole frame as a fixed perspective. So you kind of to see the whole thing, right? So in that little circle here, this is what most Western people see or alphabet people see. Non-people use their eyes tactily. They scan for an image segment by segment, emphatically evolving themselves with details rather than maintaining detached point of view. So in a way, they're looking for the pattern recognition, not just taking in this movie. The great fracture of the phonetic alphabet, the myth of Cadmus. So the Greek king Cadmus introduced a phonetic alphabet to Greece. Legend says he sewed dragon's teeth into the ground and they sprang up as armored men. The alphabet is a militant, aggressive, absorbed of cultures that forces the detribalization of man. So the alphabet detribalizes us, meaning it makes us more individualistic. The phonetic alphabet did something unique in human history. It stripped all the meaning of sound and translated into pure visual, meaningless code. Because every word has a picture, like something in the phonetic alphabet, in the non-phonetic alphabet. The phonetic alphabet, basically, A doesn't mean anything. Like the A, there's no meaning there. It's just A. The schizophrenic individual and a linear time. So what McLuhan is arguing is that because of the alphabet, we became detached from ourselves and we became obsessed with linear time. So the passionate, mystical, simultaneous time looks like this here, which is that the Homeric hero becomes a split man as he assumes individual ego. Inner monitions are projected outward as gods, where the empirical, rational, and chronological time of Western culture, the Greeks trade the mythic surrounding presence of the past for a chronological visual time. So you're basically trading the eye, you're trading ear for the eye. Exhibit B, King Lear's darker purpose. Meantime, we shall express our darker purpose. Give me the map here. So King Lear's map is a 16th century novelty, the isolation of the visual sense as a kind of blindness. He proposes delegating authority from the center to the margins, stripping away the inclusive medieval world of roles. So medieval world was very much about roles and it was very centered, and he split it. The tragedy showcases the agony of translating human lives into an exclusive, fragmented world of jobs driven by competitive visual individualism, where in the medieval times it was very much about our roles, which is very tribal. And it became more about jobs. And that is what King Lear, or Shakespeare's King Lear, is about. It's about this split. Tactile middle ground of the manuscript culture. So before there were books, we would read silently. There were manuscripts and only certain people could read them, like priests or whatever. Writing was not yet a pure visual enclosure. The visual remained embodied in the autotactile complex. I think this is why in like Catholic church or whatever, they'll read the Bible to you before you could have the Bible in your home. Everybody had one before the printing press. They read it to you. Reading wasn't something you did by yourself. It was something that you experienced in groups. So to read was to hear, is basically what it was. Manuscripts lacked punctuation and standardized spelling, requiring the reader to translate the visual marks back into sound to understand them. Because printing press, people had different, languages, and they were not all standardized, but the printing press standardized languages. The medieval reading room was a place of intentional buzzing and so the reading was a physical, muscular act of masticating the divine word to release their flavors. So when you were reading, you could hear yourself back. So you weren't by yourself, basically. When you were a monk, you were reading, and so then you could hear your voice back. Because the point of reading wasn't for you to do it silently. It was for you to hear it, to understand the words back to yourself, which is very interesting. Reading, because the eye and the ear were inexplicably linked, pre-print scholars possess prodigious memories crammed by the association of silent print. So people would read to themselves. Like I said, an app that I'm working on right now, where I verbally speak to the app to tell it my meals or how I'm feeling. And so I never type anything. Two ways of seeing light through versus light on. So this is the part where this is very important and it's very visual, and this is how things change. The manuscript in the Gothic mind, the literal text is an inclusive lattice containing all possible levels of meaning simultaneously, requires contemplation and participation. So just like I forget what the things are called, where the light comes at you. And light on is a modern print mind, which is text as an opaque surface, meaning is singular, explicit, and observed from a fixed, detached point of view. So basically when you're reading alone by yourself versus the other way, it's like you are basically getting light onto yourself versus the other way around, where you are shining light on the book. The Gutenberg takeoff and the first assembly line. So the Gutenberg printing press was the first assembly line, and it was the start of the Industrial Revolution. Typography was the first mechanicalization of a handcraft, because before that, handcrafts, you had the monks or whoever was writing, they did everything manually, and there were mistakes and different interpretations, like the manuscripts, things like that. So the printing press was the start of the Industrial Revolution, and it was the start of when people started manufacturing things instead of the craftsmen making them. Then it became machines making them. So this is the start of the mechanical era. It created the first, that's why the book is called the Gutenberg Galaxy. It created the first exact, uniform, repeatable commodity. Before that, when you are craft things, not everything is repeatable. Things have variations. It allowed for the translation of all knowledge into a strictly visual, mass-produced format, severing the eye from the ear completely. And so this is the start of the machine age, basically. But because of technology and the electric age, eventually, if you read more McLuhan's books, you start to understand we're in the electric age now and things are going in a different direction. The end of the Gutenberg Galaxy, basically. The empire of the eye, the invention of the three-dimensional perspective and the illusion of depth. And this was, the Renaissance was very famous for things like this. The creation of the desacralized, profane world, silent reading, and the result, intense private individualism, like Don Quixote. I mean, I never read Don Quixote. He's this guy who's obsessed with books about knights. And he loves these books and he's reading them by himself and everybody around him is like, this man's crazy, like he's with his books. The rise of nationalism driven by homogenized vernacular languages. The reversal of the electronic age. So we are now in the electronic age because of electricity, right? So the electric light bulb and the electricity has shifted and changed the Gutenberg Galaxy and the mechanical era. So electromagnetic technology dismantles the uniform visual print culture. We are swiftly returning to the auditory space of simultaneous relations. The externalization of our nervous system via electronic media recreates the acoustic tribal field of mass on mass scale. So now, in a way, we are going back to this tribal era. We're becoming auditory people again. Like I mentioned, kids will talk to their iPads or their phones, like I do my phone all the time. Welcome to the global village. So the electronic media creates total interdependence, ending the era and the visual detached individualism. So individualism is changing and it's morphing and it's dying basically, and we're going back to this tribal culture mentality. And you see it in like Reddit, you see it in 4chan, that was the beginnings of that tribal era. And you see it in TikTok and all of this. You're seeing these tribal cultures coming about and it's here to stay because that's what our natural state as humans are. We are tribal people. We are not individualistic people. As the person's name, I don't know how to say his name, noted, we have created the nanosphere, a technological brain for the world that recreates Africa within the Western experience, meaning that we are becoming like tribal cultures, or all becoming, Western culture is becoming tribal again. The pluralistic mind and the kaleidoscope, I think that's how you say it, kaleidoscope. We are no longer locked in a single sensory trance of print. Through the technique of suspended judgment, we can understand the bias of our tools. As James Joyce envisioned, we now possess the kaleidoscope, the ability to live continuously and pluralistically across all technological cultures simultaneously. So we can now connect to different cultures. We can be part of many different cultures and many different tribes. I mean, look at your TikTok algorithm. Go scan your For You page. Go swipe on your For You page. Those are different tribes. Those are different maps of who are coming back, to you. So thank you so much for listening to this book. This is one of my favorite books. It's very hard to read. The first time I read it, I fell asleep because it was hard to get through. But it's a really great book, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you enjoyed me playing GRIS. GRIS is a great game. It's a little bit depressing because it's about, it's GRIS because it's gray, because she's not seeing colors, and slowly but surely she starts seeing different colors. And so right now we're in the blue world. I think this is a blue or yellow world, I forget, or the green one, I don't remember, but here we are. Thank you so much for listening or watching me and watching me at the same time. I will make more videos about this. There are other videos that I have created, and I will make more videos about my conversations with NotebookLM.